What's up, guys?
Hey everybody.
Welcome to another Sunday evening live travel therapy mentor video. This week we're going to be talking about, is a DPT degree worth it financially? This is an article that I wrote almost 2 years ago now. I wrote an article comparing DPT to some other healthcare professions and some other potential options. And I wrote about some of the pros and cons and whether or not I would change my choice based on finances. And that article is one of, I think it might be the most viewed article that I've ever written. So it's obviously something that struck a chord with people that are either contemplating physical therapy school or maybe current students or new grads that are thinking about, was this worth it? And I've seen a lot of negativity lately in different physical therapy groups, either travel groups or just regular physical therapy groups. Basically negativity about how much debt is incurred and the salary's not increasing, or the salary not being what the new grad expected or what the student is expecting getting out of school. And we're kind of in tough times right now because tuition keeps going up and reimbursement is stagnant or even decreasing, which means the salaries can't really increase. We're kind of there's a ceiling there. And so we're going to talk about some of the pros and cons and what our take on it is. Do we regret our decision? Things like that. And hopefully we can give some insight. We'd love to hear what you guys think. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of PTs tuning in. So do you regret your decision? Do you think it was worth it? Do you think the salary is okay, or is it too low for how much debt you incurred? We'd love to hear from you guys. So Whitney's going to introduce us, and I'm going to get this video shared in a few different groups and hopefully get some more engagement.
Hey everybody. So like Jared said, we're going to talk a little bit about the financial aspects of choosing the DPT degree and the DPT profession. And of course, we want to also talk about the non-financial aspects of this too, which we've already gotten some feedback from you guys. So for some quick introductions, for those that may not know us, my name is Whitney Aiken.
I'm Jared Cazazza.
And we are both doctors of physical therapy. We've been DPTs since 2015. So we entered PT school in 2012 and graduated in 2015. And that means we've been practicing for about 4.5, going on 5 years now that it is 2020. We practice as traveling physical therapists. So many of you guys may know us from our page, Travel Therapy Mentor, where we're coming at you live from tonight. We've been travel PTs for the duration of our career. We started traveling right away as new grads, and we've never settled down and taken a permanent job yet. So we've been travel PTs. So we're definitely coming at you guys from that perspective, but we just want to talk tonight a little bit more about kind of the degree and our profession in general. So like Jared said, he's going to share our video in a few groups so more people can join the conversation. I see that quite a few of you guys are on right now. Hey Matt, hey Jordan, hi Jenna. So for those of you guys that are tuning in with us tonight, I know some people already gave us some feedback in our post earlier today. Thank you for that. If you have feedback, we would love to hear from you in the comments. We'd love to hear who's watching. If you would just say your name, if you're a student physical therapist, if you're a current PT. I know we spoke with someone earlier who she was a PT but not a DPT. If you are a DPT, let us know who you are and kind of what perspective you're coming at us with tonight. We just love to hear your feedback. We kind of wanted to host this as a discussion tonight because we see this discussion go on a lot. And like Jared said, there's a lot of job dissatisfaction and burnout in our profession right now. So we want to talk about some of the cons, obviously, and then some of the pros and kind of our take on this situation.
Yeah, so financially, like when you talked about with the introduction to the DPT degree, we have an extra year of school. We have higher tuition costs. If you look at any tuition schedule for a college, the higher the degree, almost always the higher the tuition price is. So going from a master's to a doctorate not only means one more year of school, meaning more tuition there, but usually it means increased credit hour costs for each credit hour along the way in that program. So that means we're seeing a lot of PTs right now graduate with debt between $120,000, $140,000. I would say that is probably the average. And we've seen some over $300,000 in debt from undergrad and PT school. And those are usually people that went to maybe a private undergrad and a private PT school, or maybe they took some longer path to get to where they're at. But yeah, it's debt is getting out of hand for sure. And so far there doesn't seem to be any end in sight. It's almost been I can't remember, I did some research on this a couple years ago when I wrote that article originally, but I think it's been like 8 to 10% average increase in tuition costs over the last 15 years or so. And that's huge. I mean, that's considering that inflation is 2 to 3%, 8 to 10 when compounded over that time period is massive. And that's why we see right now PTs graduating with their doctorate that have 10 times the debt that people graduated with 25 years ago working in the same profession.
Yeah, if you guys are watching right now and you want to drop some numbers in the comments of what your current student debt is, I know we've seen a lot of numbers thrown out there, like Jared said, anywhere from 100,000 to 300,000. When I graduated, mine was somewhere around 145, 150, because I went out of state for undergrad and then I went in state for grad school.
Yeah.
And Jared's was about...
I was in the 90s, and that's because I got grants and scholarships for undergrad, so I owed nothing there. And I lived at home for PT school, and I still was at over 90,000, which is ridiculous. That's a lot of money to invest into your education just for a 3-year program.
Yeah, and unfortunately ours are kind of on the lower end. I mean, I'd say mine's pretty moderate at 150, starting out, but we've definitely heard people over 200,000 and 300,000, which we're going to talk a little bit about the average salaries that we're seeing in the physical therapy profession. It's staggering compared to the debt.
Yeah. Hey, Christian, thanks for joining. Hope you enjoy those books. Salaries. We did some research on this. We've talked to a bunch of PTs as well, new grads and experienced clinicians. It looks like about the average starting PT salary is somewhere between 65 and 70,000, and with the actual average being somewhere right in the middle of that, probably about 66 to 67,000. And as you gain more experience, obviously your pay increases. But for someone graduating school with, say, 150,000 in debt, making 66,000, that is not very much. That's over 2 to 1 debt to income ratio, which is very hard to overcome, as a new grad. And it's really tough because, people get disillusioned and they get disheartened by the profession because they don't realize going into this what that amount of debt means on a 10-year repayment plan. That could mean a $1,400 a month payment or something like that. That's huge. And when you're making 66,000, you pay taxes, pay for, say, you buy a house when you get out of school. That leaves very little money left over, and that makes people a lot of people we're seeing right now very upset because they expected, okay, I'm going to get a doctorate, I'm going to get out of school, I'm going to make decent money, I'm not going to have to worry about money, and that's not what happens. You end up really having to worry about money. You have 10 years of payments to make.
Yeah. So we looked up some statistics earlier. The resource that we used was payscale.com. So they said that the average salary, and these are nationwide averages across all settings. So you're going to see variance here. Obviously, higher cost of living. In some cases, you might make a little higher money. Certain settings, you might make higher income. But average across the board, they were saying the entry-level PT average is 66,000. Physical therapists that have 1 to 4 years of experience, the average is 69,000. 5 to 9 years of experience, 77,000. 10 to 19 years of experience, 82,000, and 20 or more years of experience, average 86,000.
Yeah, and obviously though that includes all settings and includes the whole country. So there's a huge variation there, and we've seen that traveling around. If you go, it's kind of counterintuitive, but a lot of, even for permanent jobs, travel jobs, whatever, rural places with low cost of living, a lot of times will pay higher because they have trouble finding permanent staff, or they have trouble finding PTs to come there. And that applies to OTs, SLPs as well. Whereas you would think high cost of living areas, like we worked in Massachusetts near Boston, going there and seeing the cost of living there, I assume that they made a lot more than we did coming from where we're from in Virginia. And then I talked to some of the therapists there, and they were starting in an outpatient clinic at like 62,000, which is very low. That's way lower than most of the places in Virginia. And I was really surprised by that. I mean, it's hard to imagine graduating, living in a high cost of living area with a bunch of debt, and then only making 62,000 a year. That's very low. Yeah.
So I see that a bunch of you guys have joined in with us. Thank you for watching. If you're watching right now, again, if you just want to leave a comment below, say who you are. Christian said he's a new grad, DPT. Let us know if you're a new grad, if you're a current student, if you've been out for a few years. If anybody also wants to drop any numbers in the comments, if you want to share with us maybe how much student debt you have right now, or even if you want to share salary averages or numbers that you're seeing in your area. I know a lot of people don't want to share exactly how much money it is that they make, but if you want to say like an average for where I live is this.
Yeah.
But these are kind of the statistics that we're seeing out there right now.
Yeah.
And the key point that we're kind of trying to drive home here now is just shaping the current situation that we're in, where the debt is rising and maybe the salaries aren't rising with it. The salaries are kind of relatively the same as they have been over the last 20 or so years.
Yep.
And that's disheartening in a lot of cases, and we get that.
Yeah, so Karen just said that it's so variable in terms of pay, and that's true. Even in Virginia, where we're from, that's where we have the most experience on pay. We know people that graduated from the same programs that we did that started at $80,000 as new grads, which is pretty good. We also know people that started as low as $56,000. So that is a huge variation. It's in the same area, and some of that had to do with setting, but not a ton. I mean, the higher pay was outpatient, the lower pay was acute care, which is kind of crazy. We also know some people that worked in private practice outpatient that made in the 50s. So there's a lot of variation. That's definitely true. But obviously, moving is not always easy for people. The easy answer is to say, okay, well, go move somewhere that is in need of PTs that will pay higher. But not everyone can do that. If you have families in the area, say like aging parents, things like that, you can't really move easily. So that's not always an easy solution.
Yeah. We've also seen a lot of people wanting to stay in these highly desirable areas. For example, right now we're on contract in North Carolina, and the Raleigh-Durham area is very popular, cool up-and-coming, cities there. But the problem is they're very oversaturated with PTs. So a lot of people graduate from these DPT programs. There's a ton. I think there's like 6 within an hour of Raleigh-Durham. And a lot of those PT students are like, wow, I really like Raleigh-Durham. I'm going to stay here. My friends are here. I've got family here. Maybe I'm in a relationship here. But then they're seeing these salaries in the 60,000s, and they're like, hey, I just paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to go to, Duke or whatever. And now I'm only making the salary in the 60,000s. Well, it gives. But you also have to understand the supply and demand there. It's just they're oversaturated, so they can offer those lower salaries and people are taking them. So there's a lot of variables and factors that go into salaries. Yeah.
One other thing to talk about here, not directly related to the finances. Thanks for all the comments, guys. We'll go over those in a minute. Not directly related to the finances is burnout. That's like one of the most common things you see in all these different groups now, whether it's PT, OT, SLP, all these groups talking about burnout. And a big issue with burnout there is the financial position, because you have this doubt in the back of your mind, like, how am I going to be able to afford this? How am I going to be able to pay this debt and still live? And how am I, that's a scary thing to think about. But in addition to that, what we see is a lot of new grads, they feel like, and this is a good way to feel, I think. You come out of school, you want to be the best possible clinician, and you put a lot of time in. You are very thorough in your notes. You do a lot of research outside the clinic. You are, I guess, very empathetic towards patients. You want to make people feel better. That's why we got into this profession, right? And the issue becomes that all those factors together, combined with this empathy fatigue, which is something that I really dealt with, like listening to other people complain to you, obviously that's therapeutic for them, but it's not therapeutic for us. It's really difficult listening to a lot of negativity all day and not feeling a little bit upset yourself, or even if it's not upset, it just takes you out of being in a good mood. You can't be smiling and laughing when someone else is in a lot of pain. And that's a very difficult thing about all therapy professions. So the financial aspect, combined with the fact that most therapists, new grads, are coming out and working, I wouldn't say most, but some are coming out working a lot more hours. And then with that empathy fatigue, and that's a recipe for burnout. And I think that's what we're seeing a lot of. And not only burnout, but people being dissatisfied with their choice.
Yeah, so a lot of people feel like they're being overworked. They're working way more than 40 hours. Maybe they're an outpatient PT and they're spending 50 plus hours in the clinic. And like Jared said, the empathy fatigue. There's productivity issues. Gosh, we just recently did a video on productivity issues in all settings. There's pressure to do more, see more. And this isn't specific just to PT. This is kind of healthcare in general. Productivity is an issue where there's, do more, see more patients, bill more units, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of things that kind of lead to this job dissatisfaction, unfortunately, in our profession right now. And so we get that. That's kind of the current environment that we're in. Now, to add on top of the variance between the salary and the debt ratio, and then the burnout in the clinic, we also are seeing some changes to reimbursements that have already come down the pipe this year with Medicare, and that might be coming even more next year with Medicare in 2021.
And we've made some videos about this. Our feelings are that these changes overall are positive. Well, okay, there's a bunch of different changes. We'll talk about some. So I think PDPM, PDGM, I think these are overall positive changes for the long term. But they are
for patient care,
for quality of care. But they're very difficult changes in the short term. And they, for the most part, are going to lead to reduced staffing and probably reduced pay, which is very difficult for therapists, especially ones that are living paycheck to paycheck, or they're trying to pay off their debt or whatever.
Yeah, we've seen huge layoffs just this past year at the end of the year when PDPM rolled out in the skilled nursing setting, and we're anticipating we could see even more layoffs now that PDGM for the home health setting is coming around. And I know you guys are hearing this out there too, because we're reading it in all these groups and these articles and these petitions and things that people are getting laid off and their hours are getting cut and their salaries are getting cut. And it's a negative time right now because of that. Now,
a really scary issue coming up, well, I would say really scary, but the 8% reduction in Medicare reimbursement that I'm sure probably the majority of you guys have heard about. Hopefully you guys have heard. Let us know if you heard about the 8% cut that's coming. This is something that CMS proposed, and it ended up passing last year, and it's set to go into effect in 2021. And that's going to be basically just, the specifics aren't out yet for the budget, how it's going to go, but they're projecting an 8% reduction in basically all PT service reimbursement in terms of Medicare patients. And for some clinics, especially some of the rural clinics that we've worked at, outpatient clinics, a majority of the patient population is Medicare. So that's going to basically just mean an 8% cut. An 8% cut in reimbursement means probably reductions in pay, right? Because if the clinic is already paying their staff pretty well, they should be paying them at the top of what they can. If all of a sudden they get 8% less, they're going to have to reduce pay.
Yeah, all money has to come from somewhere. And so that's where it's like, a lot of people feel like, well, we went to school for all these years and we got this doctorate degree. Why doesn't our salary reflect that? Well, unfortunately, it's just all supply and demand. The money has to come from somewhere. It's basic economics. If the facility, the hospital, the clinic you work at is only bringing in so much money, they can only afford to pay out so much to their employees.
Yep.
Right? So that's something we have to think about. And it's kind of a scary time because we're like, wow, our services are they being devalued? Like,
yes,
is Medicare... Medicare saying, oh, we're not going to pay you as much for PT services anymore. Sorry. Tough luck. Better luck next time. It's discouraging, right?
Now, what's really frustrating about that whole situation, like I said, some of these changes I think are a positive thing. Obviously, a direct reduction in reimbursement is not a positive thing. What's kind of frustrating about that is this whole opioid crisis that we're dealing with. And I think anybody that thinks pretty critically and learns about pain science and learns about all the factors involved in pain and why people are taking opioids realizes that PT plays a direct impact in all these people and trying to reduce that opioid usage, obviously in conjunction with the physicians, but PT is extremely important there. And to basically have our services undervalued and reduced, that's a hard pill to swallow.
Yeah, not only in the opioid crisis, but just our health crisis in general. Obesity is on the rise.
Yeah.
Talking about how our healthcare system is not really a health care system, but more just like a health maintenance system. They're doing, retroactive care rather than preventative, where PT can have a huge role in preventative, right? We all know that. That's why we're passionate about this field, hopefully. So it's really kind of a hard blow to take to see that the way that we get paid for our services is being decreased, and Medicare is a huge part of the population that we treat.
Yeah.
So kind of everything that we've covered here, the overall purpose is we want to just frame and provide, a summary of what's going on in our profession right now. And you guys have heard bits and pieces of this everywhere. We're just trying to provide a summary of the environment that we're in right now with our profession. And now we want to kind of move on to talk a little bit about, what do we think are the positives? What do we think are still the good reasons to be in physical therapy?
We are still advocates for the profession. We still think it's a great thing to go into, but you do have to be cautious. But we want to talk about some of the pros.
Yeah, let's go over a couple comments real quick before we keep moving.
So Chris said, thanks for sharing. I'm on the fence for pursuing the path for this very reason. Yeah, a lot of people that read that article that I wrote a couple years ago, they're Googling, is a PT degree worth it? That's exactly what they're Googling. And they're finding my article and, reading that stuff. So a lot of people are trying to contemplate that decision.
Yeah. Christian says he has $220,000 in debt. That's really hard, Christian.
Yeah.
And he's making about $80,000 at a permanent position in a rural area with a higher PT need. So that's a pretty good, and he had mentioned earlier he was a new grad. That's a pretty good higher paying salary for a new grad. And like Christian mentioned, it is in a rural area, and sometimes those areas that have a higher demand, and a lower supply, you're going to be able to earn more income.
Yeah, Christian's on the right track, though, because he just asked me about finance books today, so he's already getting into that and going to start investing.
Yeah,
so
and if any of you guys have followed our stuff before, Jared's a huge advocate for the financial literacy in our profession, understanding finances, even when you're a student and you're preparing for school. Jared not only has done well financially and made smart financial decisions after becoming a physical therapist and starting to earn a salary, but he started making smart financial decisions back before I ever knew anything about finances, back when he was in PT school, and he chose to live at home and go to the PT school that was within driving distance from home, and that sort of
some
thing.
of that, yeah.
But
Yeah.
I'm just saying he was making smart financial decisions back then, and that led to a better financial path later.
True.
So the more you guys can do that early in this process, the better. I'm sorry, Drummel, I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce your name, Patel, says he's a PT in Alabama, getting average pay and a sniff, looking for better. That's understandable.
Bruce said Ben Fung has a lot of good content on numbers, just released some new numbers, and the job market pulse. Yeah, I've subscribed to the pulse for a while now. I definitely recommend anyone that's interested in average pay and things like that to subscribe to that.
Hey Jeff, thanks for watching. And Jeff gave us some good insight earlier to his perspective on this. Jeff was talking more about the non-financial side of choosing this career, which we're definitely going to get into talking about. Suzanne, hey Suzanne, thanks for your insight as well earlier. Mentioned that Raleigh is a tough area as well because there are a lot of facilities that are part of the loan repayment program. Yes, so that might make a difference too in the salaries that they are able to pay because they're offering loan repayment to their employees as a benefit. So you have to take into consideration not only your salary number, but the other benefits that they're offering you.
Yeah.
Hi, Sophia. So John Mill said, I'm already a licensed PT. Would you recommend the transitional doctorate of physical therapy degree if there is any better pay after that?
That's a big issue with this whole discussion, is that no, there is no better pay for having a DPT compared to a bachelor's or a master's. The pay is the same. The real benefit is that hopefully you become a better clinician and you can get better patient outcomes. And potentially if you get better patient outcomes, then you can negotiate for higher pay. Theoretically, possibly, if you're strictly going for just finances, I don't know if I could recommend it.
I think like Jared said, there's not a direct, automatically check the box, I have the DPT, yes, your pay grade bumps up this much. I think the whole goal, if you guys remember the Vision 2020 thing, was for our profession to start advancing to the point where we would hopefully all have doctoral level degrees, all have the ability to provide direct access to our patients, all be the practitioners of choice, and this would elevate our profession and then hopefully in turn down the line elevate our salaries.
Yeah.
So I still think those are great ideals, and I do hope that we are headed that direction more so, but I can't say that by you directly getting that piece of paper that says that you have the transitional doctorate will definitely mean you have a higher salary.
Yep. Okay, so now we're going to get into some of the benefits and why we think that PT is still a positive profession. So 30 minutes of talking about all the negatives, that's pretty terrible. But anyway, we do believe in PT, and we want to talk about the benefits. If you guys, real quick, if you're getting value from this video, if you are also having these same kind of thoughts and discussions with other people, please like this video. The more people that like and comment, the more people see the video, and that's always a good thing for everyone when we can talk about these things and get more information out in the open.
Yep, and share it with other people. So we appreciate you guys' support. We love when we can get a little bit of thumbs up and hearts on our videos. Feel free to tag anybody in the comments that you feel would benefit from learning more about this topic and joining in on the conversation.
All right, so why is PT still a great profession? One, the healthcare field, almost anything in the healthcare field right now is growing. I mean, a lot of baby boomers are getting older, population is increasing. It's not going to stop anytime soon. There's going to be no shortage of jobs needed for PTs in the future. The only issue there is the rate of PT need increasing going to be outpaced by the rate of PTs graduating? Right now, I don't think that's an issue. Like Whitney said, I think in some areas there's oversaturation, but usually those are the areas that have a lot of schools around, or they're desirable areas, like Southern California, Denver, maybe New York, Boston, those areas. But that is a small portion of the country. Like the other 95%, a lot of those places are understaffed. So right now, I do not think there's any oversaturation. I think the demand, the need for PTs is going up, and barring this 8% reimbursement reduction, which hopefully, can be changed before it actually goes into effect next year. I think the demand going up will hopefully lead to increased salaries in the future.
Yeah. So as you had said, as healthcare practitioners in general, there's always going to be a need, and I think that it's a wonderful profession to go into. In general, if you compare us to other healthcare practitioners, in the long run, we actually have it pretty good. So there's a lot of other healthcare practitioners that are dealing with the same struggles, the debt to income ratio, the burnout, that sort of thing. But I would say as PTs, all things considered, we actually have it pretty good. So compared to some other professions, we have a lot of autonomy. So I know for PTs in general, a lot of people that I knew that went into PT thought about also maybe going into athletic training. So I did an athletic training degree prior to joining a PT degree. And a lot of my friends in my cohort and everything that I knew stayed with athletic training and didn't go into DPT. Or maybe some people decided, okay, I'm going to go into PA from this route. So I know those are two professions that we have a lot more autonomy than those two professions.
Yeah.
If you want to compare it, obviously a PA has to practice under the direction of a physician, and an athletic trainer doesn't have a lot of autonomy. They do work directly with athletes, but they still have to. They're not able to provide direct access service in like an outpatient setting.
Yeah.
So I think that the autonomy that we have as professionals is really good, and it's put us more on the level of chiropractors when you work in the outpatient setting, and that's a pro.
Especially if you go that cash-based route, and obviously that's not for everybody. But there are other ways to make more money as a PT. One of which is travel, and that's probably 90% of the reason that we went that route is to make additional money, to be able to save for the future, things like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so autonomy is huge. Having direct access in different, I think every state now, has direct access, at least limited direct access.
Yeah.
So yeah, being able to practice cash pay 30 days to try to get a patient better. And if they're not better, send them to a physician. You can do direct marketing to patients, which is great. I think those are really beneficial things for us compared to some of the other healthcare professions.
In addition, comparing ourselves to some of the other healthcare professions, yes, we feel like we work a lot of hours. Yes, we feel like our productivity is very demanding and we feel burnout. But imagine, have you ever been to a doctor's office, a physician's office? And
especially a specialist.
The demands that are placed on them in terms of productivity is very stressful. I mean, they might be quadruple booked on the 15 minutes.
Yeah.
They've got patients in 4 different rooms that they're supposed to be in there at basically the same time. They are stretched very thin. They work much more than 40 hours. There's a lot of burnout.
A lot of stress.
Long hours.
What's really interesting, I forgot. I don't even know if I ever told you about this. I had a patient, the last job we worked at in Fredericksburg, Virginia earlier this year. It was a physician, and she came in for the evaluation. I saw her for a whole hour. I didn't even realize she was a physician until maybe halfway through. And at the end of the session, she was like, wow, I really wish that I had become a PT because you guys get to spend so much time with patients. It's just really nice. And, I'm just so stressed out and I can't stand my job anymore. And she was telling me all this stuff. And what's so crazy about that is you have all these PTs in these groups saying, I should have gone to med school. And then you have the physician saying, I don't have any time with patients and I don't like my job either. I wish I'd gone to PT school. So, it's one of those things, the grass is kind of always greener.
Yeah.
Obviously physicians make more money. They also have a lot more debt, and they sometimes will see 4 or 5 times as many patients in a day as we do. So would I have rather gone to med school? No, I considered it, and soon after graduation, there was a period where I thought that maybe I might go back to med school, but now I do not think that would be a good choice.
So I'm not saying that you should look at other people's negatives and think, wow, well, at least I have it better than them. But in a way, we have to keep things in perspective. We have to think, wow, there are jobs that are worse. I could be in a much worse position. I think in general, we have to still consider that from the financial aspect, we're strictly talking about the financial aspect right now. There's so many positives, I think, to being a physical therapist that have nothing to do with money. But from the financial aspect, yes, the first several years after you get your DPT degree are hard when you have a lot of student debt. However, once that debt is paid off, we really have a lot of salary potential, compared to a lot of professions out there, non-healthcare related. I mean, have you ever thought about laying bricks? Have you ever thought about, really hard labor?
Yeah.
We have it pretty good. We have a really moderate difficulty job, in my opinion. compared to a pretty good salary potential. Yes, it's not like you could be having a Bentley in your yard and have an 8-bedroom house and have a maid in all circumstances, but can you support a family on a $66,000 salary? Yes. Can you have all your modern conveniences? Yes. Like, it's pretty good.
It can be tough. So I have a different perspective on this, I think, because in undergrad, my first 2 years, I went to community college, and I went to community college full-time, and I worked full-time. I had 2 jobs during that time. One was a stocker at a grocery store, making $9 an hour. I considered dropping out of school and not continuing down the path of physical therapy to become a grocery store manager, or a grocery department manager, making $12 an hour. That was a consideration that I had. And
this is when you were an undergrad.
When I was an undergrad. And honestly, I thought at the time $12 an hour is all I'd ever need. And it's so crazy to look back on that, because that would have been... the whole life path would have been obviously completely different. But that job, being a stocker at the grocery store, was a lot harder physically and more stressful for me than being a PT. My other job was delivering furniture, and I made $9 an hour doing that. And so we go to people's houses, take furniture upstairs. It was a very physically demanding job and a really stressful job. And PT is easier than that job, and that was a $9 an hour job. So you do have to keep things in perspective. Obviously, we have a lot of education, so you can't directly compare those things. We have a lot of debt, so you can't compare that. But overall, I think if you've worked some really bad jobs before, it's not that bad of a job.
Yeah, and I think when we look back and we talk about those things about, like, wow, look at where we are now compared to then. Jared was 18, 19 years old in community college doing these manual labor jobs and making $9 an hour. There were people who were adults who that was
Most
their
of them
profession.
Yes, yeah.
That wasn't a stepping stone job. That wasn't a temporary job. That was their profession, to work at that $9 an hour job. And that was just their life. And I mean, that's the reality for a lot of people. And so I think we just have to look back and think, okay, we have a career. Yes, we've invested a lot of time and money into the degree to get this career, but we make a pretty decent salary to be able to support ourselves and our families. Could it be better? Absolutely, but it could be a lot worse at the same time.
Yeah, and just getting off that whole, those jobs are not very comparable, but some other professions in healthcare that are comparable are things like veterinarians that go to school just as long, if not longer than us, have usually more debt, and make the same or less than us. That is a very tough field, and they're usually overworked, and so comparing to something like that, not that bad. Another thing, Whitney mentioned athletic training. Athletic training is in a really rough situation right now. They just went to an entry-level master's, which means more debt for them, and starting salaries there are less than half of what a PT starting salary is.
And hours are usually worse.
Yeah, hours are worse. So we don't have it great. There's other professions, PAs have it probably better than us, even though they do see a lot more patients. Their debt-to-income ratio is better. But we have it a lot better than a lot of other professions. Even primary care physicians, if you account for how much debt they have, how many hours they work, how many patients they see, and then their pay, I think PTs have it a lot better than primary care or pediatric physicians. So, So I would say we're firmly in the middle of the spectrum in terms of, like, graduate degree professions, debt-to-income ratio, who has it worse, who has it better. So I think it's important to remember that, because a lot of people don't have that perspective. They don't think about these other healthcare professions that might have it worse than us. They look at a surgeon making $600,000 a year, and they're like, they have $400,000 in debt, they make $600,000 a year, their life is great, all this stuff. But there's a lot of other healthcare professions that don't have that.
What do you guys think? What's your perspective? We'd love to hear from you in the comments. Do you think that are you on the same page with us? Do you think we're totally wrong and this whole career's all down the drain? Just tell us in the comments and let us know.
Amber,
we'll read a couple comments here, and then I've got some more things I want to talk about in terms of the positives of our profession and where we see this going.
Yep. Amber, thanks for joining.
So Amber, you guys went to
undergrad
together. Hi, Amber. I made the most I ever made as a new grad in acute care, she says, in Northern Virginia. I make less now in outpatient with 3 years of experience. I sadly have refused a student in the past because I struggled to encourage anyone to go into the profession, she says. We have a PTA in our clinic, and I'm not looking forward to hearing my clinic's plan for how they're going to supplement the 15% increase in reimbursement. Decrease in reimbursement for Medicare services provided by PTA. That's a good point. We hadn't brought that up, the PTA decrease in reimbursement. She says PTs are definitely undercompensated and frequently pushed towards salary versus hourly positions, because clinics know that you will have to work 40 plus hours with the volume that they demand. And so that's why a lot of people are forced into salary positions.
Yeah, those are good points. Salary positions are very common, and I think the clinics outpatient clinics at least, probably skilled nursing as well, that have salaried positions, they do that on purpose, I think, to try to push people to work more than 40 hours.
Yeah. Matt says, I can relate to Amber. I am nervous about taking a student, but I still want to encourage people joining the profession.
Yeah.
And I understand, Matt. I think we're we understand the negatives and we see it, but at the same time, we still think it's a great profession. And we're going to talk a little bit more in a minute about why.
Yeah.
Brandon says, great point, guys. There's an interesting bar graph online that shows the baby boomer generation from 1946 to 64, which means that they're now at the age range of 58 to 76 currently. In 10 years, when they're in the age range of 68 to 86, they will be retired. The therapy field has no choice but to have an increase in jobs.
Yeah, definitely true.
And who knows, maybe Medicare will reconsider the benefit that we can have and reconsider the 8% cuts that they're
just got to prove our value.
And now Jared wouldn't get
out of bed for $12 an hour. Yeah, that's that's probably true.
Out of bed. It's been a long time since I've been in an inpatient setting. I was like, what's that abbreviation again? Out of bed.
Especially not delivering furniture.
Karen believes that the cup is more than half full. I agree with you, Karen. Thank you for that. Chris says, and Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, are you in undergrad thinking about what you might do at this time? That it kind of sounds like Chris might be an undergrad, because he said he's thinking about whether he should or shouldn't pursue PT. And
thoughts on PT versus psychotherapy? I have no
so
knowledge. Little about psychotherapy.
I have no knowledge about that career path, Chris. Yeah. So I'm sorry, I can't provide you any insight there.
I know that for just like a clinical psychologist, I guess, not a actual psychologist or psychiatrist? Not a psychiatrist, but a clinical psychologist. I don't think pay is that high for clinical psychologists, and I think usually they have master's level degrees. So I would imagine financially they're probably not in a lot better position than we are, if even close to the same position.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Karen says, I think this is a great point, have an attitude of gratitude. So I think we do have to try to remain positive, and I'll just go ahead and throw this in there now. I was going to save it for later, but we have to try to remain positive given the circumstances of all these negatives we talked about. Why did we choose this profession in the first place? Hopefully it was not strictly for the salary. Hopefully it was not strictly to make a paycheck. I would say that most of you, if you were interviewed for your PT school application or whatever, why did you choose physical therapy? Because I want to help people, right? That's why we all want to do this mainly, is because we want to help people.
Yeah.
I mean, there's other reasons, right? Of course, like, we just think the body's interesting, or we think it's cool. We like to work with athletes. I had an injury and whatever. But the main thing is we're here to provide a service to people. We enjoy helping others. Hopefully we enjoy what we do. I know there's some people, I think Jeff had mentioned in a comment earlier today when we asked about it, some people just went into this to make money, and they were like, it's a high paying field, it's a good profession, whatever. But if you went into this for the reasons of, we enjoy what we do, we want to provide a service to patients, it's still a great profession. I still love what I do. I love to work with patients. Yes, sometimes the day in and the day out and the nuances are stressful, but I love to be able to say, wow, I couldn't do that before, and now I can do that. Thank you so much. Like, this has improved my life. This has helped my life. I used to be in all this chronic pain, and now you've helped me manage my day-to-day activities. Wow, now I can bend over and pick up my newborn baby without back pain. Wow, now I can walk. Even though I had this car accident and I broke my leg, now I can walk and I can go up and down the stairs. Thank you. I mean, there's a lot of positives.
That's true. I think there's a lot of good factors. I think pay for most people is a big concern now, but in terms of job satisfaction, I think we have a pretty satisfying job, and we have a lot of purpose in what we do, which is great.
Yeah. So we want to talk about just given the current situation, what are some things that we can't necessarily just go out here and snap our fingers and make reimbursement go up, make tuition go down, make salaries go up. But what are some things that we can do to take this into our control? What are some benefits?
Yeah. And the financial position is, your primary concern. How can you manage that? How can you make things better? Obviously, we are big advocates. You're on the Travel Therapy Mentor page of travel therapy. Like I said, that's a big reason we went into it. We have been able to make probably about double the regular starting salary of a new grad PT while we've been traveling. So that's a huge factor. You can do that, and a lot of people are choosing to do that. The travel market is, at least to us, maybe we're just interacting with more people, but it seems to be exploding. A lot of therapists want to do that, and I think debt and salary have a huge role to play in that. Another thing is look for the higher paying specialties or areas, and that would mean things like home health maybe, or skilled nursing, which, you know, some people love skilled nursing, some people hate it, but it usually pays better. Home health usually pays pretty well, and you can work PRN skilled nursing or PRN home health on the side and make really good hourly pay that way.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that are doing side hustles. You know, they're like, well, I need to get this debt paid down as quickly as possible so I can just get it out of the way and move on with my life. You know, we have financial aspirations. We want to build our net worth and help our families and buy a house and pay off our cars and all these things. So let's just wipe out this debt as quickly as possible. So there's people working 2 and 3 jobs. I'm not saying that that's a great thing. We should have to work 2 and 3 jobs to pay off this debt. But if you want to wipe it out quicker than the standard 10-year repayment, yeah, work your standard SNF job and then pick up some home health on the side.
Yeah.
There are people out there doing it, and they're paying off their debt in 2 years, 3 years. They're wiping it out, and they're moving on with their life. And then when you don't have this monthly payment that's astronomical, you can put a lot more money towards your other financial goals, putting money into retirement accounts, taking care of your family, paying off your other consumer debts, and that sort of thing. And then at that point, looking at a $66,000 or a $70,000 salary isn't so bad.
Yeah,
you know?
The national average for PT for everything, all experience levels is 76,000. So yeah, if you hustle early and you can get rid of that debt, 76,000 is a really good salary for 99% of the country, and over double, I think, the average salary of the U.S. population. So yeah, getting rid of that debt, once that's gone, you know, we're in a very good position.
On the flip side of this, there are some options. Now, I know a lot of people, there's mixed feelings on whether you should pursue these options, but there do exist loan forgiveness options or income-driven repayment options. So this is something Jared's written several articles about. If you guys have followed our Fifth Wheel PT blog before, we can link to some of them. But there are options out there that are provided by the student loan, I guess the National Student Loan Servicers.
Yep. So the income-driven repayment plans are basically created for people exactly in the position we talked about, where you might be one of the unfortunate people that has $200,000 in student loan debt, and you start out in a saturated area and you can't move or something like that, and pay is $65,000 a year. Are you ever going to be able to pay $200,000 in debt on a $65,000 a year salary? Probably not. That is probably insurmountable. Like, it's very, very difficult to do that unless you're really, really hustling, working extra jobs, working a lot of hours. So these programs are made for people in that position. And basically that drops your payment way down after 20 years of payments under some of the programs, and after 25 years of payments under some of the programs, that debt's forgiven. And that's a way that can make PT, the financial situation better, can kind of fill in that gap of the high debt and the low pay. If you can basically decrease that payment, ride it out for 20 or 25 years, and then at the end pay taxes on that amount instead of paying the full amount, that can definitely make it more manageable.
And there's so many different situations in which you could take advantage of these income-driven repayment options that exist. And so it's great that they do exist for those people that might need it. I mean, say that you are a clinician that gets into the profession, works full-time for a while, but then you decide to start a family, or something happens in your life that you decide to go to where you're working part-time. Well, now you're only working 3 days a week or something, and your salary isn't quite that high to manage this payment, this debt that you were previously paying on for the first couple of years. So yeah, then you could maybe switch to an income-driven repayment plan that suits your financial situation better. So thank goodness those exist. I mean, I'm not saying that it's for everybody to choose that path, but they do exist, so there are options, which is a good thing.
Jared says, PT is definitely undervalued for the services we provide, and we must figure out a better way to show our value heading into Vision 2030. Yeah, it's pretty much true. I mean, the reason that our reimbursement is decreasing is because we're not proving our value. We need to be better with our outcomes, better with patient education, better with marketing ourselves as professionals. That really is what's going to make the big changes in the future.
Yeah, we don't have all the answers. So, you know, as we kind of move into summarizing everything we're talking about, we certainly don't have all the answers. Like I said, we cannot just snap our fingers and make reimbursement go up, make salaries go up. But there are things we can do to try to drive our profession forward and hope that makes a difference. We can apply for these positions. It's not going to help everybody, because not everybody can get the highest position, but if you have the opportunity to put yourself in a situation where you can make more money, choose the higher paying position, choose to also pick up a PRN job.
Choose the lower cost of living areas.
Yeah, choose the lower cost of living area. Choose to do travel like we have and make a lot of money. There are ways that you can put yourself in a better position, and then also, pursuing advanced certifications can hopefully help you in the long run to put yourself in a better position to negotiate for a higher salary. If you are an outpatient type physical therapist pursuing cash-based, where you can just bypass these Medicare changes, bypass the reimbursement issues, don't worry about reimbursement, lobby for yourself, basically, okay, I can provide this service to you directly as a cash-based PT, and then if you provide a good enough service, you'll have an audience that's willing to come to you to receive that service, just like they go and they pay chiropractors in cash, or they pay massage therapists in cash, so forth and so on. So you can go that direction if that suits the type of physical therapist that you are. So we have options, which is good. We certainly don't have all the solutions, though, I will say.
Yep. So one thing I do want to mention in this video that it was kind of one of the primary things I talked about in the article originally that kind of was the impetus for this video.
The article Jared's talking about is he wrote a couple of years ago, we mentioned earlier, an article titled the same thing as this video, Is the DPT Degree Worth It?
Yeah. I talked in there about comparing a DPT degree to a PTA degree. And this is something that I started thinking about in PT school. Like, would it have been more financially beneficial for me to actually go straight to a PTA program right out of high school and work as a PTA? And I just wanted to talk about some of the results from the research I did on that. And basically what I found is that PTAs, they can start working. If you know that you want to be a PTA right in high school and you go straight to a program, you get accepted, start working at 20, making a pretty good salary. The average, I can't remember the exact number, but I think the average PTA salary is like 52 to 56,000 or something. So it's not a significant amount less than PT, if you're starting at 66 or something. So for the opportunity cost involved, which is basically 5 less years of school, a 2-year degree versus a bachelor's plus a doctorate, and then obviously much less in tuition cost. And in some cases, my brother is a PTA. He went to community college where tuition cost was extremely low for his PTA program. And when you compare those numbers, PTA, it takes a PT almost 20 years to catch up to a PTA in terms of total pay, including that opportunity cost and the debt, which is crazy. But after that 20 years, the PT, really starts to increase their salary quickly and they get way ahead. But, it's interesting to compare the other professions that we're working with, that was a big thing that I pushed my brother to pursue PTA because of that fact. Like, we don't know that we're going to be in the profession 20 years. Maybe this is something that you don't want to do for your entire life. And if that's the case, and it takes 20 years to come out ahead as a PT, then, a PTA degree for those young people that know that they want to do that might also be an option.
Yeah, and then there's just the non-financial things to consider. When Jared wrote that article, that was before these proposed cuts to the PTA services. So it is something to consider. Totally different topic is what's going to happen to the PTA profession if payment systems like CMS, payers like CMS are cutting the reimbursement for that professional. That could affect their job market in the future. We've already seen a recent change in the job market for travel PTAs. So we don't know exactly what the future of PTA is. But the way that when Jared calculated the numbers and everything, it was based on what the current profession situation was at that time. Yeah. And then, of course, there's factors like, okay, as a PTA, you're not as autonomous. You're working under the direction of a physical therapist. A lot of things to consider.
This leads right into Jesse's question here. Any thoughts on a PTA to DPT bridge program for increased job opportunities for traveling after the reimbursement changes? Yeah, I mean, I talked to my brother about this. As a PTA, going that route and then transitioning to a DPT directly is probably, if you can get into one of those programs, probably better because financially. And you can kind of skip some steps there, not pay as much in tuition, have some work experience already going into the program, and
have a really high-paying
have a high-paying job while you're going to school, which is great.
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason I pushed on that. So I think if you can get into one of those bridge programs, I think that's probably great. There's certainly higher number of options available for PTs traveling than there are for PTAs.
Yeah. So we had a couple other comments here. So we're kind of headed towards wrapping up. I know we've been on a long time tonight. If anybody is listening right now and you have questions or you have comments or feedback, please leave us a comment. We'll go through the comments. Again, if you've gotten any value out of this video, we would love if you could just give us a thumbs up on the video to show your support. And as we start to wrap up here, if anybody is thinking about traveling as an option, like we mentioned, it is a way that you can make higher income, reach your financial goals as a physical therapist. If anybody's thinking about doing travel therapy, please reach out to us. We'd be happy to help you, to mentor you and support you.
We've mentored hundreds of therapists that are interested in travel in the past 6 months, really.
Yeah. So yeah, just leave us a comment. We're going to read through the comments that we have now. Thank you guys for all your engagement. So Chris, regarding our conversation earlier, Chris says that he has a bachelor's in psych and 12 years as a personal trainer, yoga, and Zumba instructor with great working relationship with PTs. So he's trying to decide if he should pursue physical therapy.
Being a PT in a gym setting,
or
if
not.
you can do cash pay like that, is probably an ideal situation, I think.
And he says he's unclear as to whether he should pick the path of least resistance, which would be to pursue behavioral therapy with a private practice, or continue evolving his passion as a fitness professional to a physical therapist.
If it's your passion, I would go for it. And if you have that personal training background and you can basically, I guess, get your foothold in the area that you're in after you get out of school and build up a client base and do some kind of cash pay in a gym setting, I mean, that is an ideal situation.
I have a classmate, a friend who did kind of what you're talking about. He started as a strength and conditioning coach, already had a good relationship in the area with physical therapy practice owners, gym owners, and he went back to get his DPT degree later, came back, and has just been hugely successful as a cash-based PT with a background in fitness. So he works with athletes, he works with athletic populations, and they are willing to pay for his services because of the high quality of care he provides.
Yeah, I think he's charging
in that niche.
over $200 an hour for his.
It's insane.
His
so if you have that niche and you can be successful, or you have the opportunity to be successful, it might be a really good path for you. There's no guarantees in anything, but it could be a really good path for you. So a couple more questions or feedback here. Suzanne says we need to protect our profession, report fraudulent billing and behaviors. The PDGM and PDPM has come about due to fraudulent billing and the abuse of the reimbursement system.
That's exactly true. Yeah, too many people are just fine and content with just going with the status quo, not ruffling feathers, not making a big deal about things. But that is exactly right. The reason these changes happen is because we stand by and let these fraudulent practices continue, basically.
Yeah.
That's true.
So Nick has an alternate view to what we were saying. Nick says, in regards to the title of our presentation, is it the DPT worth it financially? He says, absolutely not. The worst mistake that I've ever made, and I'll unfortunately be paying for it the rest of my life because of my short-sightedness. No one to blame except for myself. Never thought I'd have so much shame in becoming a DPT. Yeah,
it's sad. Unfortunately, you're definitely not the only one that has had those similar thoughts, and yeah, I mean, that's a lot of why we want to talk to people, and that's why I wrote that article originally. Is people considering the profession, you need to go into it eyes wide open, knowing what you're getting into. You know, it's going to be a lot of debt. It's not going to be a really easy ride after you graduate. You know, it's not the easiest profession. Like, there's a lot of factors to consider, and if you don't go into it knowing all the variables, then yeah, that is really a recipe for burnout and being unhappy with your choices.
Yeah. I just don't think it's that terrible, though. I mean, I know a lot of people do. I still think there's light at the end of the tunnel. From what I understand, again, we've only been in this profession about 5 years, but from what I understand, there have been changes in the past. I know Suzanne, that's listening in with us, has been in the profession a long time and has seen Medicare changes come and different changes go through different phases and fluctuations in the job market. One factor I will say is that back then, maybe people weren't facing as high of debt when they made the decision. So that is a big factor.
That is the big difference.
But I do think that there's light at the end of the tunnel. I think that we will find ways to grow and evolve as a profession as we're facing these new challenges. I just think that we need to continue to advocate for ourselves as a profession, and hopefully everything else will fall into place. And until then, if it means we have to pick up a PRN job or we have to try to, do different things to make more money, that we might have to do so.
Yeah, and in addition to that, maintaining perspective also makes you feel a little better about the decision and the situation, because, like I said, if you're only comparing to the highest paying professions with the lowest debt, it does sound terrible. But when you think about the other ones I mentioned, like vets, primary care physicians, athletic trainers, those professions, if you look at their debt to income ratio, it's much worse than ours. So consider those, try to keep that in perspective.
Yeah. So that kind of wraps up sort of what we want to talk about tonight. I really thank you guys so much. We were on here for an hour talking about this, and a lot of you guys hung in there. We had a significant number of viewers stay on for the whole duration. So thank you so much for watching and for giving your feedback. We really appreciate it. We wanted this to be a discussion. I know that things aren't perfect right now, but I think there is light at the end of the tunnel. I think that there is positivity still in our profession. There's a lot of different options out there for us. At least we have options. But the more financially literate you can become early on, if you're a student who's watching this, if you're an undergrad student or a current DPT student, if you can just try to educate yourself on finances, try to decrease your expenses, look into ways to increase your salary with what is in your control.
Have a plan for after graduation, like what specialty do you want to go into, what's the pay like, what area do you want to be in, is traveling an option, home health, like have some idea of what you might want to do.
Absolutely. So the biggest thing in anyone's personal finances is your expenses versus your income. So if you can find ways to keep your expenses as low as possible, especially when you get right out of school, because you know you're going to be faced with the debt might be what it is. Maybe you have already chosen the school you're going to. It's already a private school, or it's out of state, or it is whatever it is. You know you're going to have a lot of debt. Well, try to keep your expenses as low as possible. Pay it off as quickly as possible in the beginning. Or if income-driven repayment, student loan forgiveness is an option for you, look into that if it suits your needs.
Yeah.
If travel's on your radar, again, reach out to us. We'd be happy to help. It's been a really good, not only financial, but lifestyle choice for us. It's not for everybody, but it's been really good for us. And I think it not only has helped us manage the financial aspect of it, but the burnout part of it too.
True.
I think we feel a lot better about the profession and the burnout because we don't work full-time at a permanent position. We're not stagnant in one location, and I think that helps us a lot.
Keeps things new, fresh.
So that's one thing that we really like about travel. And some people just do it as an ends to a means. Some people, we kind of are like what we consider career travelers. We don't know that we will necessarily ever settle down into a permanent position, but a lot of people just do it for 1 or 2 or 3 years just to earn that extra income and pay off that debt as quickly as possible. So you do have options. I think there's still a lot of positives to look into.
Yep. So again, thank you guys for joining. If you could, like this video, leave us comments if you're watching now or on the replay. If you leave comments or questions, we always go back to these videos. Next week, this is probably, we don't often not talk about directly travel related things, but I figured this was a pretty hot topic that a lot of people are talking about right now. So next week we'll be talking about something travel, physical therapy, or travel therapy related. So if you're interested in that, tune back in. If you guys are interested in that article that I wrote, that I've been referring to, one I wrote a couple years ago about is a DPT degree worth it, let me know and I can put that in the comments. But yeah, so tune in next week. We'll talk about something travel therapy related. Thank you guys for joining, and see you next week.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.